Hello, everyone. I'm Lauren King. I write about film for the Boston Globe, and it's my great pleasure to be here with filmmaker Sasha Joseph Newlinger. And I think most of you have seen his documentary, Rewind, and that's what we're going to be talking about. Welcome, Sasha. Hello.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This is great.
It's great to have you, and thank you so much for, I know I've got a lot of questions, and I'm sure the audience does too, because the film is just so provocative and so moving and so beautifully done. So let's get right to these videos. That's my first question. As many of us have home movies, tapes. I mean, it's daunting to even look at stuff that many of us see. How did you go from looking at this collection of tapes from your entire childhood to seeing where the film, to putting together that kind of powerful film that examines the trauma of your childhood?
Yeah, before I knew that this was going to be a film, it started out just as a personal journey. I had unresolved issues from my childhood, and I felt that if I looked at these home videos, perhaps I'd find some answers. And so I called my dad. I didn't even know that we had this archive. I just called him and I asked, "Dad, do you have any of the home videos left?" And to my surprise, he said that he had 3 massive boxes with over 200 hours of footage. And after I watched the first 6 tapes, I had learned so much from those first 6 tapes. And for every question that I was able to answer in the footage, I had 10 new questions that I needed to ask. And so I realized very quickly that I needed to watch all of the footage, and this was going to be a long journey to get the answers I needed. And if this turned out to be a cathartic experience, a helpful one for me and my family, documenting it made sense, because then it could be a resource that could be shared indefinitely with the world. But in logging the footage, the 200 hours of footage, I tried really hard in the first pass of watching the footage to just have a subjective human experience with it. And then afterwards, I would reflect on a tape, take some notes, watch again, and then look at it through the lens of a filmmaker. The note-taking process and watching and rewatching the home video helped me get really familiar with it as a filmmaker, and also really familiar with it in terms of the questions that were lingering that I needed to ask. And I've gotta give a lot of credit to our editor, Avila Grenier, who she also watched all of the home video and the 700 hours of present day 3-camera filmmaking that we did. She took it upon herself to understand the footage almost as deeply as if she had lived it with us. And I think that allowed for really important story structure conversations and really important creative conversations.
Well, you mentioned the editing, because I was struck by the way it's structured. A lot is revealed, but it's not linear. You go back and forth between the past and present, and there's also moments of a lot of humor, moments of just humanness that's beyond the revelations, beyond the powerful revelations. Were you conscious of that? Did you and your editor talk about pacing it that way, so that it's not just, maybe it would have been just too much for the audience to just be shown all the darkness you were uncovering?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, when the film starts, I'm a stranger to my audience, and so is my family. We're all strangers to the audience, and so if we don't show our humanness, and we don't stay aware and cognizant of the fact that we're asking the audience to join us on a hard but hopefully rewarding and cathartic journey, then what's the point of making a film about it, right? It's like, it has to be watchable. And so there were a couple things that Avila and I looked at. We wanted to make sure, it's hard to cut down from 200 hours of home video and 700 hours of present day work. But the first piece we really had to recognize is that every scene has to answer at least one question and ask at least two more. And if the home video doesn't do that for us, if a scene doesn't do that for us, it doesn't make the cut. And so that was really important. But then we also know, this is a film about child sexual abuse. And with how serious that is, we can't beat around the bush. We have to be extremely direct and honest. But if we're going to do that, we knew we had to pepper in moments that reminded the audience of why they were sitting through this and watching this. Moments that reminded them of the sweet little boy that they were behind, of the family that they want to root for. So whether it was sweet, beautiful home video moments, or whether it was present day moments that didn't necessarily take us forward, but hinted at a positive outcome for the family unit, those were equally as important as some of the most graphic and telling moments in the film.
Was there anything that you uncovered in looking at all these hours of video, Sasha, that surprised you, something that you had no memory? I mean, I think a lot of it you probably had no memory of, but looking at it again, that was a revelation to you in discovering something about yourself or your family beyond.
Absolutely. I mean, when I was going through that chapter of my life as a child, there was only so many memories, non-essential memories to my survival that I could retain. So every day was about survival, was about being able to wake up the next day. And as a result of that, there were a lot of beautiful memories that had been overshadowed by the trauma. And being able to go back years later and watch these beautiful moments that I had completely forgotten about, it helped me reconcile with the subjective experience I had as a child and recognize that even though I felt dirty, disgusting, and unlovable then, watching myself now, I couldn't help but adore and love that little kid. I couldn't help but adore and love myself. And that was the key to my healing journey, and a part of what drove me through some of these really hard moments in the journey and that we see in the film is I want to be a voice for my inner child so that there is a much louder, more public voice for all children.
Yeah. Even with that mission, I'm sure there were, maybe I'm not sure, you tell me, were there moments that you felt you couldn't go on and you didn't want to go on and you didn't want to deal with this anymore because it took about 7 years. Am I right about that?
Oh, totally. I mean, the biggest issue is, I started when I was 23, just out of film school, and I'm looking for money to make a film, and, no resume, no proof of effective storytelling. So raising the funds, that was hard, so it would be, we'd raise a bunch of funds, get a little bit further in production, then cut something together that we could show to raise more funds. So really the biggest hurdle for us was fundraising, which I think a lot of, independent filmmakers and especially independent doc filmmakers know all about. But yeah, there were moments where I felt like there was no end in sight. And what I said to myself before I started the film, and I actually recorded myself saying it so that I could reference it, is that I am choosing to go into this tunnel. And so if halfway through the journey, things seem really dark and uncertain, I have to remember that I had the courage and the bravery to enter the tunnel, which means I have what's required within me to eventually make it to the end of the tunnel. And easier said than accepted sometimes. There were moments where I questioned, why I was putting myself through this. But I can honestly say today, now as a 30-year-old, the personal work that I did and that my family joined me in doing has led to more self-awareness, self-love, healthier, happier relationships that aren't rooted in what we endured together, but instead are rooted in like love of each other and a zest for what's next. And not from a place of shoving it under the rug and pretending it doesn't exist, but having examined it so closely, we've been able to give attention to every wound. And I would also follow up with saying, you know, I don't claim to be a perfectly healed human being. I don't think that's the goal. I don't think healing is a destination. I think it's a journey. I think that for everything that you're able to heal within yourself, it just creates a new opportunity to see new parts of yourself that up until that point, you didn't have either emotional awareness to see or didn't have emotional energy to deal with.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned your family, and I did see a couple of questions from audience members that also wanted to find out about the participation of your family, because it's obviously so important to the film, and they're just it's clear you couldn't have done this without that. But were they on board right from the beginning? Did you get any pushback of, Sasha, why do you want to go down this road, go into this tunnel, as you said?
Yeah, well, you know, my dad was supportive instantly. And, you know, he could have said, oh, I don't have the tapes, and that would have been the end of it. Or he could have said, I have the tapes, but I don't want to participate, and that would have been the end of it. He was incredibly brave and courageous and supportive right off the bat. There's a lot of vulnerability for all of us, and he definitely felt it as well. So he was on board immediately. And then my mom, as soon as I told her about what I wanted to do, she was on board immediately. My sister at first had some resistance. She said, Sasha, you know, and she was actually kind of angry. She's like, we just got through this. Why do you want to dig it all up again? And my argument to her was, Becca, I don't think we got through it. I think we survived it. I think that there's still a lot that we're not able to touch without being triggered. And to me, that's not enough. Surviving it isn't enough. I want to reclaim ownership of our story as a unit and be able to move forward without parts of ourselves that we can't touch because it hurts too much. I want to deal with that so that we can truly move forward with our lives. And at first she wasn't with it, but after our Kickstarter campaign and she saw thousands of messages from survivors around the globe, she realized it was a positive experience and that this was a good thing and not something to be ashamed of. And my sister and I very specifically have an incredible relationship today because of what she decided to do in following me with courage. And, you know, I always told my family, you as individuals are more important than this film. And if you don't want to be in it, you're not in it. And we don't even have to talk about you as a person in the story. But the fact that all three of them rallied behind me and chose to join me in that vulnerability and that courage, that's why we have Rewind today.
Yes. There are some very powerful scenes with your sister and mother, but the scene with your father where you return to his childhood home, I want to just ask you a little bit about that, because it's a big moment in the film. It's extremely moving, and you are expressing emotion as he's talking to you when he's lying on the couch. I mean, first of all, I'm just curious about the circumstances of going to that house. Was it empty? Were people living there? You know, that you had to actually go in and kind of reclaim that space, and he's remembering it as he's talking to you, and the it's just so powerful. So I just wanted to hear a little bit about that scene for you.
Yeah, well, you know, there were some tenants who were currently renting it, and Detective Boren actually was also a consulting producer. He did a lot of groundwork and pre-production to help secure locations because he was in the area. So, you know, the tenants agreed to leave the house for the day. We did a clean, but a lot of the pieces that were in that house remained. And we didn't fully know that was going to be the case.
Yeah.
So a lot of these moments, like when my dad references the tile in the bathroom, like we're very fortunate that tile is still there. for him to be able to have that moment of reclamation and reclaiming his story and owning it and sharing it. But you know, a lot of people, when this case was coming out, they you know, people get angry and triggered. How could someone hurt a child? And they want to point fingers and they want to blame somebody. And a lot of people wanted to blame my dad. You let your brothers into the house.
Yeah.
And I understand that. But what I learned from making this film, and what I understand so clearly, is his perspective was so close to my perspective. So when I was experiencing abuse, I thought that I was being abused because I was dirty, disgusting, and unlovable. And I never thought that those atrocities would be committed against a beautiful person like my sister. And when I realized that my sister was being abused, that was the first time that I realized that what they were doing wasn't because of me, it was because of them. It's because they were dark and evil. So my dad, being the youngest child, he didn't have that perspective. So, you know, he grows up, he leaves the house, his brothers are nice to him again. No one explained to him what child sexual abuse was. And what he experienced, he believed, just like me, that it happened to him because he was dirty, disgusting, and unlovable. Mm. Of course, it wouldn't happen to his beautiful children because they're beautiful and worthy of love, and everybody knows that. So it's sure there's a disconnect there, but it's in response to trauma that was unresolved for him. He didn't have the support systems in place that fortunately my sister and I did. Yeah. And when people watch the film, you know, we want to leave it open-ended. People can have their own opinions, but it's important to remember that he's the one that enabled this film to be possible. Yeah. Through the footage and through granting it to me. And as a filmmaker, not needing to have creative control to be able to say, I'm surrendering this to you. Tell the story you want to tell, Sasha. In his house, going through these moments, his courage and his fortitude to be able to go back to those painful moments and express them for the purpose of sharing an important message with the world was a real moment of inspiration for me. Mm. And it helps me keep pushing forward too. There were moments like that with each person in my family where maybe I was feeling tired, but then they would come forward and show courage and bravery, and it would inspire me. And we did that for each other through this process.
So that's so beautifully said, because it is such a family film in the sense of in the impact. That's one of the things I was so moved by, is you realize that ripple effect of to every family member, just how that whole legacy reverberates over and over and over. Now, when you're out there promoting the film now, talking to survivors, talking about this issue again and again through your work, how do you find that it's impacting people, and how about people who maybe don't have that kind of family support? Do they come up to you? And I just want to talk a little bit about the effect that this film has now that it's out in the world. And we should also mention, I think it's a good point to mention that people can also see this. If you saw Rewind and want to share it with others, it is on PBS right now and will be until the 10th of June, right?
That's correct. And after the 10th, it'll be on Apple, Amazon, or it's on there right now. Like, it's also currently on all those platforms, Apple, Amazon, Google Play. But yeah, the experience that I've had with survivors and with people who've watched the film, I mean, after the PBS broadcast on May 11th, our social media channels exploded. And it reminded me of the experience I had when we did the Kickstarter, when we went public with the story. Survivors, not just around America, not just young, old, male, female, gay, straight, black, white, Jewish, Christian, like everybody. Mm-hmm. And it's important to remember, like, child sexual abuse doesn't discriminate. This is a human problem. Mm-hmm. I say this, it takes a village to raise a child, and I strongly do believe that it takes a village to rape one. I think that it's really hard as a society to come to a place where we can accept and choose to be present daily for a fight that is horrific. To recognize that 1 out of every 4 girls, 1 out of every 6 boys are sexually abused before they're 18, that every 9 minutes a child is sexually abused in America. It's staggering, and it's hard to stomach. But if these children have the courage to come forward and share these stories, the most horrific experiences of their lives, then we have to have the courage not only to listen to them, but to do everything that we can every single day to honor them and put the systems in place, like child advocacy centers, and put this in place through education and empowerment in our communities, so that we're creating an environment that's indicative of a good healing process, so that these kids can grow up to be healthy, self-empowered human beings that don't grow up with severe psychological challenges that they'll have to face, or even worse, perpetuating the cycle, like what happened in my family.
Yeah.
So, survivors are, a lot of them have been saying, like, thank you for giving us a voice. And I can't claim to be a voice for all survivors. Every survivor has their own unique experience, their own unique response, their own unique healing journey. But I think it has been really helpful for survivors to recognize that the shame and the stigma that used to work so effectively at keeping this truth under the rug is starting to wither, and more people are coming forward and talking. And the more we talk about it and the more we normalize the conversation, the better we're going to be able to handle what I consider to be the greatest social epidemic of our time.
Mm-hmm. And we talked when we first logged on and we were talking, you talked about this being so cathartic for you and part of a healing journey for you, not just to make a film, but to really examine this in your life and in your family. And then you said people who want to do the same kind of thing, and maybe it won't be a film, but it could be writing about it or in some way expressing it in some way, that there's really some work they need to do before that. Or I don't know if that's what you said. I elaborate.
I appreciate you setting that up for me here, because it's again, I can't speak to what will be effective for every human being who's dealing with trauma. But what I can say is that for me and my family, confronting these issues head on has led to such incredible personal growth, not just for us, but also more importantly, for me, I am now able to fully love and honor myself in a way that I was not able to before I started this project. And in being able to love and honor myself, I've been able to make much healthier decisions, be much more effective in my life, and be able to be more present for what's happening now instead of completely stuck or triggered by the past. But that happened through 7 years of intensive butt-kicking work in making this film, on top of a childhood of therapy. And so I really strongly advise anyone who has been through trauma, whether it's child sexual abuse or other, I really strongly recommend clinical support from a clinically trained psychologist or psychiatrist. That help is vital. It was vital to my healing. And I think that if you choose to confront these demons, which I encourage, the journey has to be for you. If the journey is about, oh, I want to do this to help others, then I believe you're circumventing your own healing journey, your own cathartic journey. It has to start with being about you. And if what you do helps others, great. But, I wouldn't recommend immediately being, I wouldn't recommend making your cathartic healing journey public without the counsel of good clinical mental health professionals.
Yeah. And you had the doctor, Dr. Lustig, that I think you're still in touch with him. It was quite an amazing, and
I love that guy.
yeah. So you're still in touch. You're still communicating with him.
Oh yeah, we talk. We try to talk once a month. Not professionally, but just as good old friends. I love him. He was part of. He played such a huge role in my ability to move forward with my life. And I said that to him the other day via an email, and he said something to the effect of, I was there to help support you and be there and help Sasha reclaim Sasha, but you did that work.
Yeah.
And he's an incredible human being. And again, I was fortunate to have that support, but there's so many children that don't have that support. And that's why we have to talk about this, because we can see what happened. Like, even if we just compare, what I went through versus what kids with a child advocacy center can now go through as a result of having services in place, it's night and day. I mean, the 10 years that I had with Dr. Lustig were vital, but a lot of the time was spent just trying to stay alive. It wasn't about necessarily moving forward.
Right.
And that was because of a broken system that didn't work to help children.
Right.
And children need our help. Mm-hmm. They can't advocate for themselves. And the other thing I want to say, since we're on this platform,
sure,
is I strongly encourage parents, when you're talking to your kids about their bodies, don't use nicknames and fake words. Mm-hmm. A penis is a penis and a vagina is a vagina. And if they sense that there's discomfort or shame around their body, mm-hmm. How can they talk about their body being violated? Mm-hmm. If just talking about the body part mm-hmm. is indirect and hard. Yeah. So we really need to make sure that kids understand their bodies and have appropriate ways to identify their bodies. And most importantly, I think more than good touch, bad touch, teaching kids about boundaries. Mm-hmm. What is a boundary? If someone doesn't respect a boundary, what does that mean? Mm-hmm. Boundaries are really important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So much we could talk about. I want to take a couple of questions from our audience. One question here, interesting that I haven't touched on it. It's about the closing sequence that you selected with Howard kissing the baby Sasha in that whole movie. And Molly, who asked this question, wanted to know, were there other clips that were considered for the ending, or how did you settle on that being the end of the film?
Yeah, I mean, for the end of the film, we were playing with a lot of different possibilities, and we did a couple of acute test screenings with film professionals in New York when we were at our fine cut to help get some feedback. But I think at the end of the day, like, there's something really important about, we've just gone, at that point in the film, we've gone back and we've looked at this entire journey to get to where we are today. And right before our ending scene in the film, it's important to have the clearest juxtaposition between young Sasha and present day Sasha, and to see our protagonist and our antagonist together. And at that time, from the home video, Howard clearly has the power. He holds a baby, right? Then we cut to present day. Sasha reclaims his voice. Sasha has reclaimed his power, ownership of his narrative. And so, yeah, but Avila, again, our editor, she was so patient. And I know as we were trying to find the right ending, there were a lot of different pieces that we were looking at. And I remember, she called me one day and she was like, Sasha, I found a scene that we had kind of chucked many, 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 many cuts ago, but I really think that it's going to work here. Can I play with that? I want to show you what's up. And I was like, yeah, I mean, I trust her, you know what I mean? She's incredible. And when I saw that ending, you know, she and I both knew that was it. That was going to be the ending of the film.
Mm-hmm. Were there any moments that you got rid of, but that's interesting that you went back to it and then it suddenly had a place in the film? Was there anything that you had to go that you hated losing in a film of this length? I'm sure there were lots of things that you could not include or that didn't kind of fit with the story. And then there were some beautifully playful scenes. One of my favorites is when you're burying your hamster, and to me making perfect sense about not wanting to put it in the box and letting it go into Mother Earth. That's a lovely scene. So I'm glad for certain ones, I'm so glad they stayed in. I'm sure others had to go.
Yeah, you know, I'll give you one scene that I'll give you a scene that would have been really uplifting and one that would have been hard, but I think critical. But again, you know, there are many scenes that do the same thing in terms of how we push the narrative forward. So you don't need three of the same thing, even though they're all great. You need one, and it needs to be placed properly, and then the film moves forward. But I think that, you know, there were some disclosures that my dad, there was a lot more in the house with my dad, you know, his childhood home. And one of the things that Howard took from him was his joy of the piano. And I won't get into graphic details, but when Howard would choose to, according to my dad, when Howard would choose to abuse him, he did it in a way that stripped joy of the piano. And there was a scene in present day after we had gone to the house. So it was the same day we had gone to the house. We came back to his present day home, and he sat down at the piano, and it's an electric piano, so he put headphones in because he feels vulnerable to share his music, but he didn't plug them in, and he played. It was the first time I really got to hear my dad play, and it was just free form. It wasn't written, and it was just unbelievable, and tears were coming down his eyes. You know, the bathroom scene won out, but yeah, that was an incredible scene. And then on the joyful side of things, the guinea pig funeral that we have in the film is a cut down version. Okay. I call it a director's cut, but it's Avila's first cut of the scene that we just didn't have time for. It became its own thing instead of being part of the narrative in the film. But the unedited or the unreduced version of the guinea pig funeral is incredible. and I actually play that uncut scene at events and conferences when I'm speaking to law enforcement and mental health professionals, and usually gets a really good laugh. But you know, again, we're not trying to make a 4-hour film. We know we're talking about a heavy topic. Mm-hmm. We got to say what we need to say, and we need to get out of there as quickly as we can, because and as effectively as we can, because that's our responsibility as filmmakers, making a film for an audience. So yeah, there's plenty there that didn't make it to the film that we certainly were fond of.
So you show it to law enforcement to just as a way of lightness and humor, or is there a bigger message there?
Yeah, so I founded Voice for the Kids, which is my public speaking company specifically for speaking on behalf of children at child abuse prevention conferences and at fundraisers for child advocacy centers. So, you know, I help raise funds for child advocacy centers. Last year, we raised close to $3 million for child advocacy centers, which was awesome. But when I speak, I share my story, but it's obviously different than the film. It's you know, PowerPoint presentation. I'm talking about the journey of what happened, the issues with the legal system, yada, yada, yada. But after that whole journey, the message I want to remind what we call the multidisciplinary team, the people who work to protect children, CPS workers, law enforcement, mental health professionals, physicians, attorneys. I want them to remember that their work is doing something. A lot of these professionals, they're in the thick of it when a child is going through the trauma, but they don't get to see how their work helped that child move forward and grow up. And so they're seeing an adult, Sasha, talking to them, and I'm trying to remind them that, you know, the kid in the guinea pig funeral moment, you got to grow up to be the person they're seeing today, in large part because of the work that they do. And it's really important to have that perspective.
So you're still getting out there and speaking and obviously promoting the film, but doing your own speaking, even with everything that's going on with many of us quarantined. You're able to do that via Zoom and places and technology, or is that on hold? What's
you know, doing a lot of stuff on Zoom. Like I'm actually doing an event with the Massachusetts Children's Alliance, and you know we're working really hard to get the message out, but it's, you know, that's going to be later in this month, May 26th. But we're trying to figure out, and a lot of other organizations too, as I'm speaking with them, we're trying to figure out a way to keep the message going, even though, you know, there's the physical limitations of this pandemic. And so, you know, we're working really hard to do virtual events, conversations just like this, because the film is accessible. People can watch it, and then we can have discussions. But, you know, what I'd say is I'm eager and honored to have the opportunity to help spread this message right now. But there's definitely a time limit on it. You know, we were talking about it before we went live here today. I did all of this hard work so that I could move forward with my life. And I'm in the process of doing that. I, you know, live with my wife and our puppy, and I mean, life is incredible. And so I'm passionate about this issue, and I want to make sure that I plant enough seeds so that when I retire from speaking about this topic, there's enough, I feel that I've left enough behind for there to continue to be the kind of conversation I would want to be a part of.
Do you already have another project in the works or in your mind, or something else you want to work on after this?
You know, there's a lot up in the air right now. I've thought a lot about it. You know, it took 7 years to make this film. Right before the pandemic struck, I was going to be on a 34 airplane, 12 city speaking tour. And that got postponed. And so as a result, I've had the first true break from work since like 7 years ago. And so I'm really taking time to enjoy that. But I am working on a book. I am debating whether or not I want to do another doc first, or whether I want to transition over to fictional narrative, which is what I studied at school. And you know, but whatever it is next, whatever project is next, I know that it has to be a story or a way of filmmaking that inspires me and challenges me enough to want to sacrifice the time and emotional energy that it requires to make a film. And because that passion has to be there, I think, for someone to be crazy enough to sacrifice what it takes to make a film. So that's so whatever's next, it'll be that meaningful to me.
Well, we've gone over. I could talk to you all day. There's so much to talk about, but you've been so eloquent and generous with your time, Sasha. Thank you so much. And thank everyone who turned out for this discussion and asked so many questions and participated. Rewind is available. Tell your friends, it's on PBS. And I'm really happy we had you here, because you really shed a lot of light on a very, very, very powerful and important topic. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for helping us to spread this important message.
Well, thank you for the hard work you did to bring us to this point. Okay, well, thank
Okay.
you, everyone. Be well,
Thank
be
you.
safe.